Hey. Um, so I was doing a video on this earlier, but the quality was kind of messed up. Yeah. So, we're gonna do this quick and fast, so I don't have to spend 23 minutes like the other video. So, strength buffs, I'm sure you know what they are. Strength buffs certain abilities like, for example, just a random frame, Mirage, Eclipse, buffs your, like, how much your damage does, how much the ability does, stuff like that. I feel like that's really simple to understand. Range, I think you get it. Efficiency is kind of hard to understand, but pretty much the lower it is, the higher your abilities would cost. The higher it is, the lower your abilities will cost. Duration, the duration of your abilities, and yeah, that's the main things about frames. Now, for weapons, there are some main things about weapons and specific things about weapons. For example, for melee, there are things like combo, but the main things you want to understand are there's base damage. You want to have some sort of base damage on your weapon. You want to have some sort of status on your weapon. You want to have some sort of crit on your weapon. If you're going for a crit build, of course, which I'm not. But if you don't want to go for a crit build, you want to have status damage on your weapon or just more status on your weapon. That's the basic understanding of it. Also, if you're going for status, use condition overload. I have said it so many times. It's just not worth not using it. Like, it just gives you so much more damage than you think it does. Yeah, so that's the main things about just weapons in general, like just melee weapons in general. The only other thing I'd have to add is combo. So if you see that number at the bottom right of my screen, 3 times and 51. Let's try to it should be like right around here, right above my abilities, right above where it says Astral Twilight on my glaive. There's a number and there's a counter, 2x, right? That 2x number is my combo counter. What that will do is boost my heavy attack damage by 2 times. Now this goes up to 12x, and what it also does is applies certain buffs to your weapons. That's right. Sometimes like Blood Rush for crit chance. Um, and Weeping Woods for status chance. That's the main things you need to know about weapons. And the only other thing is you have stance mods. This changes the way your weapons default attack. So boom, boom, boom. Instead of that, we have Astral Twilight, which gives me this. Much more range focused attacks. And if you want to see like all the combos possible with it, you go to combos right here. Yep. And that's the main things to know. Also here you go, you have arcane slots for your melees. These work really well at some weapons. All of them work good in some sort of way. It just depends on the way you choose to play. I don't know why that rhymed, but yeah. Next, guns. Guns are kind of a little bit more complicated. You have, of course, your base damage, as I talked before, multi-shot. Multi-shot will make your gun shoot more bullets. This is always a damage buff. You should always have it on almost every weapon. But what does this number mean, Narsh? Well, I'll tell you what it means. It means you'll shoot out 3 bullets, and that third bullet will only do 60% damage. Now, yeah, that's basically how to understand it. And some weapons decrease your accuracy, which mean that every single bullet out of that gun will not be as accurate. I feel like that's pretty simple to understand. That's the same for pretty much every gun. You want to have same thing, some sort of status. If you're going for a crit build for crit, stuff like that. Now, the only other thing you'd need to really understand is, well, there's 2 more things, is how the buffs work. This is a additive buff. So this will be multiplied by your so let's say we have pressure point. So you have pressure point and try to find the mod here. Spoiled strike. Pressure point and spoiled strike. They're both additive buffs, meaning they will be added to each other and then multiplied by the total damage to give you your damage. But things like smite mods, which actually make it so that your weapon gets multiplied. So this will be multiplied by this and then be multiplied by your total damage and then only be added to your total damage. So this will be considerably better. This will be better in almost every situation, but only against certain types of enemies. As you can see, these are only to Murmur, these are only to Corpus, these are only to Infested, these are only to Grenier. That's the main things you need to know, and only other thing I tell you is about the enemies. So, we have enemies, right? See, they have a health bar, some of them are orange. Orange health bars mean that an enemy has armor. This armor value is dependent on the level and is capped as of currently. So that will give the enemy a huge damage reduction. When I shoot the enemy, it reduces their armor value. Now, why do I do that? How do I do that? I want to do that. I'll tell you how. By modding corrosive. Electricity and toxin gives you corrosive. If there's 10 stacks of corrosive on an enemy, it reduces their armor by 80%. Now, there are about like 20 different frames that can do this. Like, let me try to see real quickly. If you have Mag's Augment for the 4, she can do that. There's just a whole lot. Saren is a prime example that people don't know about. Uh, if you have her Venom dose above 100%, it will be able to full strip enemies. If I don't kill them. I would show you, but, you know, I keep murdering them on accident. Oh, let me just use my Exceltra. You have to shoot them quite a bit. I don't know really how. I think they have to have spores on them too. I don't know. I think they did patch it, but you used to be able to have Venom dose and be able to full strip enemies with a gun. So yeah, I guess that's patched now. But what you can do if you have green shards, which make it so your corrosive stacks go up. If you have 15 corrosive stacks, it should full strip an enemy. So that's really good on Saren. Everybody should put 2 green shards on Saren. That's amazing. If you main Saren, of course. If you don't, it's not worth doing. Um, and the last and final thing are frame damage buffs. That's right. Some frames buff your damage and buff your status on your weapon. For example, Nourish. What does Nourish do? It gives you viral damage on your weapon. This is modified by power strength, and basically, I do viral. It's right there. Viral. Yep. I feel like that's pretty simple. I don't think you should be too perplexed about that. Other thing, the main important thing about frame damage buffing is actual damage buffs. Now, Mirage's buff is a multiplicative buff, just like Rhino's buff, and it is just better. Well, actually, it's not a multiplicative buff. It's its own buff that acts like a faction buff, so it is basically better than Rhino's buff. But if you use a faction mod with Rhino's buff, it will be better. Like, the Roar will be better. But if you use a faction mod with Mirage's buff will be the best buff in the game. So, yeah. I don't use faction mods, though, so it doesn't matter. All I have to show you is this. Just damage. A lot more damage. So, yeah. With these buffs, with basically almost every buff in the game right now, takes your damage and multiplies it. So if it's a percentage, it'll usually multiply. The only real exception that I know of right now is Gyre. I think it used to be like this, but I don't think it's like this anymore, where it used to be that your crit chance was set to a number, but I think it is that it gets added, like as a multiplicative bonus. So that's all I really have to go over. If you have any real questions, like just like how the hell do I do this? How the hell should I mod this? I will show a quick example of how to mod and answer any questions in the comments or answer any questions you have for me in the Discord. So this is my example here. Damage, base damage, you need it. Multi-shot, you need it. Also, this is a really simple build. You should be able to literally do this on every single weapon you have. Except the Arcane. I don't think you'll have the Arcanes because you're just starting the game. You should be able to have most of this. Probably not all maxed out, but you'll have most of this if you're like decently into the game. Uh, Base damage, multi-shot, more multi-shot, 100 munitions because I go for crit on this. Let me fix this real quickly. If you are up to the point where you're at demos, you should be farming corrupted mods, and these corrupted mods will be really good for buffing literally any weapon. It's just, it's necessary. It's like the most efficient thing you could do at the start of the game, getting these corrupted mods, because they're just so useful for modding. So you have your 100 munitions. This just gives me slash on every crit, my crit itself, my status mods. All your mods should synergize in some way. What do I mean by synergize? Like, my base damage helps my crit damage. My status helps my actual damage. Everything helps everything in my builds. So yeah, this performs really well, and especially with the damage buff. Only other thing I'd have to say is, do not be an idiot. Do not go for all fire rate, because it's not always going to be really good. For example, like Exceltra, you saw I changed my fire rate into crit and it did about like 10 times better. Also for bows do not go for crit, fire rate, because you don't need that much. It already fires pretty fast. And for the final thing I'm going to show for those newbies, Xoris. Literally one of the most busted weapons in the game. So what I recommend people use is Rhino. Rhino, because Rhino's goated and I love Rhino. Rhino, right? So Rhino, you're gonna have some, some sort of mods to buff your roar, make it do more. I don't know why that rhymed again, but yeah, you get the point. Make it do more. So this is a simple status damage build with a little bit of crit, which I will showcase in a bit. We have our damage multiplier from our frame, and we have our actual damage. As you can see, it's kind of eh. That's because this build is for beginners. And I'm not throwing it enough. That's the main thing. Of course, I'm throwing it kind of stupidly, so I'm getting knocked over every 2 seconds. The enemies need to be a little bit more grouped up, so I will showcase this actually in a second. So let's see. How well does it do? You want to have quick volatile return, which does this. It explodes on impact and comes right back. You want to explode it and then manually detonate it with your old fire button, which should be middle click or press down on right analog stick. So, like this. Wait for the explosion. This just to show what to do. Wait for the explosion, and then explode it again. And then you'll do a little bit of damage. You can just keep going. Mind the fact, these are a level 140 Steel Path enemies with armor multipliers, with health multipliers, and everything. So I think you can understand how insane this build is for how simple it is. And here's the build. That's it. You will have literally all these mods when you start out the game pretty easily. Around when you get to the Void, the only mod you will miss until you get to the Void is Power Throw. You will literally get all of this really easily, really early on. Astral Twilight, you might have to ask from one of your friends, be like, "Oh, can I get this, bro? I don't have it." Yeah, but you'll eventually get that if you don't, and you don't have to use Astral Twilight. It just helps you so you can have all your mods on there. But let me just show you the difference between newbie modding and, actually good modding. Not saying the other build is bad, it's just like, there's such a big difference. Didn't throw it right. Like, that was one throw, man. One singular throw. They're all dead. So, I think you can understand the huge difference between newbie modding and advanced modding and understanding every single mod, how it actually works, if it's multiplicative, if it's additive, what gun CO is, what CO is in general, and I will explain literally all of that in my next video with a more advanced tutorial on modding for those players that are actually deeper into the game and have most of the important mods for modding. So yeah, that's it for today. That's a beginner guide for modding. And get the Xoris. Do not sell it. I will kill anybody if you sell it. Also, Mirage is probably one of the best frames to use with glaives because number one, if you've played Mirage at least once, you'll notice that only 2 of her frames fire. Now, I don't know why the hell this happens, but it's okay because every single one of her frames attack. Meaning, even if you don't have a good build, it will be equivalent to every single one of your frames attacking. You're throwing 5 glaives at once. And yeah, that does a little bit of damage. Yeah. And not only that, but the damage buff is also multiplicative and its own faction damage, as I mentioned before, meaning huge numbers. Yup. And that'll be it for today's video. Only thing I'd like to mention is that Mirage's buff will also give you less consistent numbers, but way higher numbers. Rhino's buff will give you a flat amount of damage, like you'll usually stick at that damage instead of it being like variating. And that's really all I have to say. I will go into more advanced tutorial later on, also how mods interact with abilities, other stuff like that. Thanks for watching.